It wasn't an algorithm. You need to understand that first. The images and sounds you were shown, the cryptic numbers that appeared in your recommendations, that was a signal, a tuning fork resonating with something already inside of you. You were chosen because you are one of the few who senses that the reality we see is just a fraction of the whole story, a beautiful, hypnotic, but fragmented echo. For months, you've been collecting those echoes, feeling their power without understanding the source. Consider this video the first translation of that source. This is not another theory or a guess. This is the blueprint, the very architecture of the philosophy you've been subconsciously drawn to. What you are about to see is the key that elevates you from a mere spectator of the mystery to an active participant in its unfolding. The puzzle pieces are in your hands. Now, let's begin to assemble them.
There are things that hold, not because they contain some inviolable kernel of strength, some metaphysical skeleton that cannot be broken. No, they persist because they have learned reality's least glamorous and most effective art: to duplicate themselves, to echo, to reappear in nearly identical forms until some error or defect that hinders their further existence, utterly exhausted by the infinite multitude of these returns, finally surrenders and retreats. I know this is not a romantic thought. You might prefer to believe that the world remains intact by virtue of some inner nobility, some metaphysical inclination toward order, some refined instinct of the cosmos. But no. More often than not, what you so confidently call stability is born from something far less poetic, from diffused redundancy, a web of repetitions. These repetitions seem entirely unnecessary, excessive even, right up until the moment they catch the whole weight of the world, preventing the very fabric of reality from tearing apart. From a distance, this repetition might seem like the product of a meager imagination, but upon closer inspection, it reveals itself to be an impenetrable fortress. In complex systems, redundancy is not an ornamental flaw, but an ontological precaution. A server replicates, a cell preserves copies, corrects, rereads, repairs. The brain perpetually renews its neural connections. Memory does not simply store, it recalls, reconstructs, and more often than not, quietly rewrites. Even cities, when they genuinely function, do not entrust everything to a single cable, a single conduit, a single artery. Nature itself, though it likes to pretend it is spontaneous, obsessively employs the principle of the double lining. You are born with 2 kidneys. You breathe through 2 lungs. You think across 2 hemispheres. But why look so far? Any human myth, when it wishes to endure, refuses a single version. It scatters into variants, commentaries, divergent traditions, as if it had understood long ago that the only way not to die was to accept reincarnation through repetition. It is almost comic. You go looking for essence, and you find in its place a backup. But we must not reduce this to some mechanical principle. Redundancy safeguards not only, and not even primarily, the objects that make up the universe, but reality itself from its own inherent tendency to fray. Every reiterated pattern, every return, every gesture that presents itself again constructs a small safety net beneath the void. The sun rises again. The traffic light returns to red, then green, then red. Stairs maintain regular risers. Words behave predictably enough to save every sentence from turning into a ritual of summoning meaning out of nothingness. You call all this normality, but only because habit is the name we give a miracle once it repeats often enough. In the end, This continuous, unwavering confirmation of the real operates like a sacred liturgy, albeit one conducted entirely without a priest. I've told you this in a previous episode, but I'll say it again. You wake up and the world is exactly as you left it. Each morning, objects hold their ground with an almost military discipline. The cup resting on the table remains undeniably a cup. The wall persists in its humble profession of being a wall, and the floor refrains from opening up beneath you. And this continuity does not derive solely from some abstract law of physics written on a chalkboard, but from an incessant reconfirmation. The world does not merely exist, it reiterates. It reiterates itself. It reiterates its rules, its limits, not once, but continuously, like a system acutely aware of how high the risk of disconnection truly is. Phenomenology, from Edmund Husserl onward, attempted to articulate something strikingly similar. The object never presents itself all at once, but through profiles, adumbrations, progressive confirmations. You never possess the whole thing. You circumnavigate it. You recognize it because it returns, because it allows itself to be encountered from different angles without dissolving into something else. Perhaps the real is simply that which survives the reiteration of the gaze. Science, too, when it is honest with itself, deeply distrusts singularity. An isolated result counts for little. What is needed is replicability, repetition, the willingness of the phenomenon to occur again elsewhere under different hands. It must materialize before other eyes, eyes that are tired and skeptical enough not to want yet another comforting fable. Empirical truth almost always passes through the corridor of redundancy. It is not enough for something to happen. It must return. It must know how to repeat itself without becoming parody. It must cross time without losing form. It is a severe criterion, yet an understandable one, for a universe that failed to constantly confirm its own existence would be virtually indistinguishable from a meticulously organized hallucination, which, in fairness, is not a scenario we can entirely rule out. And there is a far more intriguing dimension to this constant returning. Within esoteric traditions, repetition is never dismissed as mere replication. Rather, it is a deliberate act of intensification, stratification, and incision. A mantra is not designed to impart new information, but to stabilize the wandering mind. A ritual does not seek to logically explain, but to seamlessly realign. Whether observing the rites of late Hermeticism, the currents of Neoplatonism, the rhythmic chants of a Byzantine liturgy, or the obsessive geometric loops of a Tibetan mandala, what continuously returns is not there to adorn the void, but to seal it shut. This repetition builds sturdy bridges between planes of existence, preventing fragile human consciousness from slipping through the unseen joints of the world. If that sounds excessive, try stripping your own life of every form of reiteration. Erase your habitual roots, your comforting minor gestures, the familiar words you use to name yourself, your biological rhythms, and your emotional confirmations. And watch how rapidly your sense of identity begins to resemble a dark corridor with violently flickering lights. The truth is, you yourself are a profoundly redundant device. You navigate the world wrapped in overlapping memories, grounded by stabilizing habits, and anchored by personal narratives that you repeat like spells just to avoid the exhausting burden of being born anew every day. You confidently say, I, treating it as a pure, indivisible substance, when in reality, it is simply a convergence of patterns stable enough to pass for a person. Do not take offense. To achieve even that is already a monumental feat. The continuity of the self is not an unshakable monolith, but an ongoing process of mental maintenance. You tell yourself who you are, then review, correct, and reset that narrative, carefully saving one copy after another. And when a fragment of your identity inevitably becomes corrupted, the surrounding layers rush in to hold you together. Everything that endures because it is sustained by something repeated, humble, and apparently secondary. The grand architecture of the world, then, rests not solely on sweeping supreme laws, but on a multitude of small returns. And these reiterated patterns serve as the hidden ribs of reality, relying on cross-checks, echoes, and doubles to act as minor confirmations, preventing a major collapse. When Claude Shannon formalized information theory in 1948, he demonstrated that noise can only be resisted through calculated redundancy, that structural repetitions must be inserted so that something vital might survive loss. It was intended as a technical lesson, of course, but it applies beautifully everywhere else. The more exposed a system is to the chaotic noise of existence, the more it must learn to repeat itself intelligently. And here the text should perhaps offer you a lucid conclusion, a neat little gift, a sentence you could carry away like a smooth coin in your pocket. Yet, to do so would be to betray the very theme of our inquiry. Redundancy does not conclude, it relaunches. Moreover, it leaves you with the impression that what returns is never entirely identical, and that within this minimal, nearly invisible difference, the fate of stability is quietly decided. Perhaps the real is not what exists once and for all. Perhaps the real is what accepts being confirmed again and again without shame. We were promised the absolute, but we received a safety net. Honestly, it could have gone much worse. See you in the next episode.